Hello. I want to address these issues around the comedian and presenter, comedian Bill Cosby. Um, there's a number of things I want to say around this case. Firstly, I should make a disclaimer. This is quite important. Number one, I do not know all the details of the case, so I don't want to give the impression that I am pontificating on issues that I don't know all the circumstances of. So I'm going to say right now, I don't know if Bill Cosby is guilty or innocent. I don't know that. Very often, when it comes to these sort of cases concerning celebrities accused of something, people have very black and white views. It's either, oh, they're 100% guilty or they're 100% innocent. I will say my inclination is more towards the former, but there's a few thoughts I want to share about this case, but also others around it. I say case, but I should really use the plural. So, Bill Cosby really needs no introduction. He was once the highest paid comedian on television, the highest paid TV star, so to speak, as well as being the probably most high profile African American on TV. What this is sort of bringing back memories of, I think it's fair to say, is the O.J. Simpson trials. Likewise, O.J. Simpson was a popular public figure and his trials were very divisive. Now, at this point, there doesn't seem to be quite the same level of racial overtones, and that's a good thing, because the racial sort of tensions that came about from the O.J. Simpson trial were very unfortunate, and that's the last thing America needs right now. So I do think there's far less of a racial component to this. I think the bigger issue is around how people view celebrities, and there is a situation here that I think needs to be addressed. Bill Cosby is not the first powerful man in the entertainment industry to have serious accusations in his direction. So basically, the allegations are from no fewer than 38 different women that Bill Cosby um, made inappropriate sexual advances, whether that's outright rape or not. I don't know the details of that, but these are clearly serious allegations. Now, as I understand it, in the first trial that he went through, it was ruled to be a mistrial. Whether that was from a lack of evidence or whether that was from a hung jury, I believe it was the latter. For whatever reason, it's now been discarded, so he's basically free to continue his comedy circuit, and that's what he's been doing. He was at a venue in Canada, and whilst most of the patrons were Bill Cosby fans, there were some protesters, male protesters, I might add, who basically said Canada shouldn't tolerate a rapist, being allowed to do this. Um, and they justified, they were interviewed afterwards, and these guys said the reason they stood up and took a stand was because, in their opinion, no one else was. And was something during that event that raised an eyebrow. Apparently, a woman got up to use the restroom. Bill Cosby said, "Where are you going?" And she said, "To get a glass of water. Do you want one?" And he said something along the lines of, "It's not good to have a glass of water around me." Now, that may be an off color joke. He is, after all, a comedian. And, I made the video a while back about politically incorrect and risky jokes. Um, I think the thing with Bill Cosby, the thing that raises so many issues, is the fact that he was really a very stable, sort of family man type figure. The Cosby Show was basically, in a sense, a role model African American upper middle class family. And this sort of fatherly figure in Bill Cosby, suddenly there is another projection that hardcore fans simply don't want to see and they don't want to accept. This reminds me of things we've seen in Britain in recent years. Jimmy Savile. For many years, Jimmy Savile was a widely respected children's entertainer. We now know he died in 2011. At the time, there was widespread tributes to him. But gradually, it started to emerge that actually there was another very dark side to Jimmy Savile. And it's been established that he is actually one of Britain's worst ever child predators. I mean, this guy really was about as low as you can get. Um, and now looking back on old Jimmy Savile, video clips from the 1970s and 1980s, seeing some of the lines that he comes out with, you would wonder how the hell did no one ever raise questions about this. Um, so I found that we're now in a situation where nothing seems innocent anymore. Another situation was Rolf Harris again. The public image was such a nice chap. He does great artwork. He's knighted by the Queen. He's etc. etc. Um, this isn't entirely a new phenomenon. There's always been a contradiction between certain public figures, between their public image and actually their private reputation from contemporaries. I'll give a few examples, and I'm not for a second suggesting this is in the same sort of caliber. Take, for instance, Bing Crosby. Again, widely admired figure, America's most beloved entertainer. I believe at one point he was called the most admired man in America, even ahead of the president at the time. But apparently, in private life, he was a really lousy father and not a very nice man at all. Now, that is a reputation. I can't say it's a fact. But the point I'm making is there is an aspect to this, and I'll cite another example: John Lennon. John Lennon, the man who wrote Imagine, the great prophet of peace and tolerance and a cultural icon and all the rest of it. Apparently, he was a pretty unpleasant figure to his sons, at least to I can't remember if it was Julian or Sean, but one of them, I believe it was Julian, and don't quote me on that, but has testified that this guy, he's done interviews where he said he feels very frustrated when people come up to him and say your father is basically God, because he knew a very different side to John Lennon. John Lennon, committed domestic violence against his first girlfriend. So there's a great deal of hypocrisy in the public image that he projected. For all his talk about being a feminist and being a great women's rights advocate, he treated his own girlfriends, not talking about Yoko Ono so much, but his previous girlfriends like shit. Um, Muhammad Ali, again, great cultural icon. You know what? Ali flirted with the KKK. But this is all stuff I've covered before. I'm not going to go over it again. But the point I'm making is that you get certain public figures and their status is such that they're almost untouchable. And this is something I find it makes me very uncomfortable. Um, excuse me, not Bing Crosby, Bill Cosby may not be quite at that level, but he's still a pretty famous figure. And what I'm saying around this is what we always see with these situations. You have what I would call the fanboys, fangirls. They're so diehard in their support, they just cannot fathom that there might actually be something to it. And when it comes down to it, you have to ask the question: is it more plausible that 38 different women are lying, and it's one big conspiracy to bring this man down, or that one man is telling the truth and it is a big conspiracy? I am more inclined to believe the former. That no, excuse me, the I'm more inclined to believe the position that it just doesn't seem plausible that all 38 women are lying about him. I mean, does that really make sense? I'm not saying it's totally inconceivable, but I think common sense dictates that it is more likely that 38 people are telling the truth than one person is telling the truth. Also, and this for me is a very important factor, um, if you look at some of Bill Cosby's attitudes publicly, it really does raise eyebrows. I mean, there's an old clip when he was standing in for a late night TV show presenter. I forget the guy's name now, one of the well known ones. He was standing in for him, and the Colombian model Sofia Vergara appeared on the show. She was a young woman at the time, probably early 20s. Um, Cosby, even then a middle aged man, was behaving completely inappropriately. And this is anyone with common sense can see that the way he was talking to her was totally crossing a line. It wasn't just like you're an attractive young woman. It wasn't just a balanced compliment. It was pure lecherous behavior. Now, That doesn't prove that he's guilty, but to me, it is a character assessment and it does definitely raise eyebrows. Clearly, Sofia Vergara was uncomfortable. She said at one point, "This is not appropriate." And, people could say, "Oh, well, she dressed seductively or whatever." I don't care. There comes a point, all men have to have a certain degree of self control. And if you can't have a certain degree of self control, then that's a problem. So I don't really accept the line that, oh, she dresses like that, so she deserves it. No woman wants to be harassed in that sort of way, so I don't accept that. And regardless of whether she invited her or not, she made it clear that she's uncomfortable. He should have stopped, but he didn't. I mean, the things he was saying, oh, you make a man want to commit sin, and I don't know. To me, it was just crossing a line. Again, it doesn't prove that he's guilty, but if I was a juror looking at that as a character reference, I would think, well, that raises eyebrows. If that's how he talks publicly to young women, how the hell do you think he's going to behave privately? Think about that. Also, his fellow cast members from the Cosby Show apparently have been divided on this. I've seen some, totally defending him and saying that they believe it's all, made up. Others are saying they're not at all surprised. So to me, there's division in the ranks here. If this man was innocent, you would think they'd unilaterally get behind him. If these are people that work closely with him, I'm more inclined to believe there's no smoke without fire. Now, I'm a strong believer in due process. I'm a strong believer in innocent until proven guilty. And I don't believe in trial by media. Unfortunately, where celebrities are involved, it's almost impossible to avoid that because inevitably there's going to be public interest. There's no way to make something like that private when it's a public figure. In the UK, we have certain injunctions on naming public figures. In the US, not so much. Um, And there is good reason for that, by the way, because innocent people have also went through complete turmoil. I mean, Cliff Richard went through hell in terms of being named as a possible predator, and it later transpired he was completely innocent. He has often spoken about how much that impacted his life and his reputation, because, of course, even if someone is found innocent, that question is always going to be there. So it is very, very important that all the facts are established. Now, there's a very important aspect that I want to address. Bill Cosby's defenders and people in these cases always say, "Oh, why are they coming forward now?" Now, this attitude is problematic, and this is why. If we look at other cases, for example, Jimmy Savile, there's a very good reason why victims didn't come forward at the time, and that is simply that they were silenced by the establishment. That was the case at the time. The BBC establishment basically protected Savile. They had to confess as much. They had to basically admit it, that victims were not taken seriously. So I think it's very, very conceivable that a very popular man who's, seen by millions of people, who's widely held up as a role model of the African American community, indeed the wider American community, um, people are more likely to believe him than a young woman who is not known by anyone. So clearly, it's not a level playing field in terms of who's going to get the fair assessment. So I think that's a big problem, and people need to think about that. When they say, why did they not come forward? That's the reason. Because they're immediately denounced as liars if they do, and in some cases, threatened. I'm not suggesting that's been the case around the Bill Cosby situation, but I am saying it as a fact that when you have famous men in particular, and there's these sort of allegations, that tends to be the case. Now, of course, there's the other side of it, which is that fame in itself could be an Achilles heel, and the fame could prevent someone getting a fair trial because they're under huge exposure. I think that might have been the case with the Oscar Pistorius trial. Um, so it really is a double-edged sword. It can either work to huge favor for the defendant or to huge detriment to the defendant. I think in this case, because Cosby is such a popular figure, um, I think he's got the odds stacked in his favor, and that's unfortunate. I think there's no smoke without fire. And I'm not saying he's guilty. I don't know. He might be innocent. but at the very least, he does behave like a creepy old uncle, which is not a crime. But the point I'm making is he doesn't entirely help his own case. In fact, he's been asked directly about this, and he hasn't exactly. My line of thinking is if someone is innocent, they would be yelling at the top of their lungs, if they could, without legal restrictions, that I'm innocent. These are completely false allegations. Now, Cosby hasn't been doing that. And whether that's a guilty conscience or whether he's arrogant and he thinks that he's going to get away with it, I don't know. But I would say to those who are sort of coming in with this, oh, why now line, think about the fact that women who do try to report these things are immediately denounced as liars. And that's not to say that there aren't women who lie, there are. There are women who pervert the course of justice, which is appalling. But because they do that doesn't mean that those who, bring forward allegations are automatically liars. And I really have a problem with this fanboy mentality. People think that the public image that they see is the entire profile of a person. And you see many examples of this. I saw it with Mel Gibson when he had when the audio tapes were released, fierce arguments he had with his Russian ex-girlfriend. I've listened to those several times. I've given a lot of thought to it. Mel Gibson's supporters were immediately saying, oh, she's a gold digger. She wants to extort money out of him and so on. Now, that might be true. I don't believe she was 100% innocent. But her rationale for recording those audios was that she genuinely feared for her life and she was doing it as evidence. To me, she was acting a little bit calm under the circumstances. But Mel Gibson's language wasn't exactly vindicating him. He was making outright threats. And there's things he was saying that no matter how stressed out or angry you are absolutely uncondonable. And all the comments, unfortunately, on those videos are, "Oh, Mel Gibson's a god. Mel Gibson can do no wrong. Mel Gibson's the boss. This is," and I'm sorry for the language here, but this is a lying, gold digging bitch that wants his money. I have a problem with that mentality, and I'm not an idiot. I know there are women out there like that, and I don't believe she's entirely innocent. I don't believe it's a case that she's a meek little girl who never argues back. But in the end of the day, there's no excuse for a man physically threatening a woman the way Gibson was doing. And the fact he happens to be a great director and, an iconic figure of Hollywood should not kind of give him should not exonerate him from potential wrongdoing. And I really, really have a problem with the fanboy mindset around this. It's unfortunate. And I'm saying this, I'm not a feminist. I'm not someone that always points the finger and says like, "Oh, this person is definitely guilty." But I do think there's certain regressive attitudes that do need to be challenged. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Now this has been a bit longer than I intended, but let me know your thoughts. All I would say is to people who are outright saying he is guilty, we don't know, and Bill Cosby deserves a fair trial. On the other hand, those who are blindly defending him, try putting yourself in the shoes of someone who might actually have been a victim of his, and try thinking for a second that the character he portrays on screen is just that, a character. People act like they know celebrities personally, and for me, that's a big problem. I don't care. I mean, this is the problem with super fandom. People get blinded by celebrity. Okay, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts.